Hey, good morning, everyone. Jim McDermott here. We're going to go ahead and start with our DAACAT. And as you'll notice, that's a new pronunciation. Thought DAACAT sounded a lot better than DAACAT. With the extra A in there, makes it a little more intelligent sounding. And I would give Carrie Snyder credit for using that pronunciation. Number of topics we're going to talk about today. Got myself, and Paige is actually on vacation, but we will have Adam Striegel joining us, our crop protection tech development representative, since there are some weeds yet to spray, so wanted to have him on with his expertise. So always got to start off with a trivia question, and it seems like this is a question that has been brought up pretty much every time we've had the DAACAT from the beginning, but pretty basic one, but it will be, how long can corn survive underwater? Could maybe ask the same thing about humans or carpet, or take your pick, whatever has been ruined by water, but be pretty generous on pretty liberal on the answer with this. There's a range, but now we've got a few answers in there, and we've got 24 hours and we got 48 hours. I'm gonna have to go with the 48 hours as close. And a lot of factors, of course, depending on temperature of the water because of the oxygen content. But Mr. Homeguard, you officially will be the winner for this week's trivia. Generally 2 to 4 days. Again, when you've got corn that's able to be up above, bigger corn that's above the water line, you can sometimes get a little longer survival than that, but I really think the overall it's not long enough. It's got a lot of corn. That's a tough situation. As usual, we're going to do a little check-in on our GDUs, current topics, and finish with a spotlight product. So a lot of information to go over. So we're gonna move along pretty quickly. So GDU accumulation, and just a shout out to the people at Rock Valley, the challenges that they have with flooding. So use that as the location this morning. So from our different planting dates, you can see where we're at on GDUs, generally right around average. In fact, the only place it's above normal, and that's only by 3 GDUs, is from that 12th of April planting window. Starting to get close enough for silking projections. I know I was going through southern Iowa last week and certainly saw a number of tassels, and maybe a few of you are starting to see some tassels. But for taking a 108-day maturity product, we're looking at 14th of July silking, which that would be a few days after we're seeing tassels from that earlier planting date. And then on down the line, just for fun, threw in the June 1st planting date, which, by the way, we're behind on GDUs from that planting date, but we're looking at that first week of August for silking. So you can see about a 3-week spread, or a little more than a 3-week spread from the planting dates that cover a little over a month and a half. As far as replanting, guess like we're talking before we got started here, now I guess the attention, a lot of these flooded areas are turning to, okay, managing crops and what can we do? For corn, for all practical purposes, we're pretty much done. Not much of a opportunity once we get to this last week of June or 1st of July on corn. Maybe some exceptions for silage scenarios, or maybe the extreme high moisture, but not. You look at yield potential on corn, and there just isn't much of an opportunity. Soybeans, obviously that yield potential has dropped fast. Right here at the end of June, we're talking 40 to 50%. Of course, that is made up of some wide swings. You hear some cases where beans go in the first week of July and could make 40 bushel. Then you hear another year where it's 10 bushel. So a lot of dependent on when those rains come, or if they come late season. and if the beans, of course, are able to finish before a frost. As usual for this late planting, some of the recommendations are keep that population high, at least 175,000, if not more. Of course, narrow rows for weed control. Maturities, pretty wide range here. We know there's some some areas where you can still push, up to about that 1.5. That would be, I think, the latest I'd be going as we get into July, especially if we're, say, in the 5th of July, 10th of July, then we'd want to be backing things down. I know some of our FSRs have been able to get some 09 XF3s. That one can really plant as late as we'd want to plant soybeans. But some of the other varieties, 1.0 or 1.4, 1.5, I think can still work as we're going here over the next week or so. And hopefully this will be the last time we actually will be talking about planting or replanting. Of course, on these saturated fields, another topic we've been talking about most of the spring with nitrogen loss. As dealers and as people that work in ag, a lot of, I think our job, and especially in some tough springs like this, is really trying to not only give the agronomic recommendations, but help emotions and help keep people focused on really managing their crop. And that's where cases come in as far as nitrogen. Obviously some areas that have had some loss. Trying to pick out those fields that are not on the complete extreme where we've got acres that are done for. But if we've got crops that are just looking tough and yellowed, we know we've got a very good chance at seeing a response from even an additional 40 to 50 pounds of nitrogen, wide dropped or side dress, even late up until tassel time. So continue to try to manage and keep people's spirits up. As you're talking on some of these areas that are mud covered, I'll have a few pictures and we can talk about that. But usually you're talking obviously slowing down the ability to conduct photosynthesis, but probably the biggest risk is the diseases, Fusarium crown rot, different type of root rots, red root rot. When you get dirt in the whorl, crazy top physoderma, some of those other diseases. On the soybean side as well, the root diseases, I think, will also take their toll. Phytophthora, different root rot. So, pretty obvious, but those would be the type of things that even when we have survival of this crop that we're going to continue to see. As I was looking at some fields yesterday, you have these scenarios where leaves are pretty well covered. An area like this, it's not just from weekends floods. I mean, you're talking areas that have had several, 2 or 3 different floods over this. And right here in the whorl, they've pretty well rotted, kind of like being sprayed with Select. It just is dying from the inside out, and you could just pull those whorls out and they were rotted. Soybean side, I was encouraged in some of these fields that were, again, underwater, have been underwater, or leaves are pretty well black. There was actually some new growth showing right there at the top of the plant. So there's hope for some of these fields that can look tough or have looked tough. So hopefully water wasn't over them too long and they can somehow bounce back. So, obviously we've still got some managing to do on weeds. And so that's where Adam comes in, especially as we're talking bigger weeds, some of these late spraying scenarios. So wanted to bring Adam in and talk about that topic.
Perfect. Yep. With Paige on vacation, I was luckily brought in as the B squad. No, guys, I want to be fully cognizant that we've had a little bit of a interesting season this year. I wanted to highlight that, starting off with, this is more probably pertinent when we start talking about fungicide disease risk, but in terms of our temperatures and our rainfall patterns, first and foremost, I would say that we have been a little bit cooler, especially in the last 30 days. So looking at that northwest Iowa, that northern Iowa corridor, our Iowa climatologist has you guys relatively, if you look at the coloration thing at the bottom, we're at least, I think, 4 degrees below the 30-year average for the last week. And then when you look at that 1 month forecast, it's going to be probably a little bit closer to that mean. But in all intents and purposes, the last couple of years, especially when it came to weed management, we've been hot, we've been dry, and it's always been challenging, I think, to operate with those constraints, I would argue. So with temperature underway, Jim, next slide, please. The next comment I would probably call out would be and specifically regarding our precipitation patterns. And so, especially if you're in that Northwest Iowa quarter, I don't think I'm going to be telling you anything you don't know, but looking at those 7-day reports and the 30-day reports here again from Iowa's climatologists, you can see that we've been wet. Craig Lamourie, my counterpart at Storm Lake, is, I would say, an avid amateur meteorologist, and he keeps me up to date with our weekly rainfall totals. We in Storm Lake definitely got less than our northern counterparts did, but even still, to see 5-7 inches in a week is just definitely a departure from what we've been used to the last couple years. And so the reason I highlight this, Jim, and I guess we have one more slide, maybe, I think, it's not just the last week or 30 days. This is, I would say, been pervasive for the last season, the last 90 days. This is departures from means, those 30-year averages. You can see just how much wetter we've been. And I probably don't need to tell, a group of dealers and our retailers that we've been wet. But the reason I highlight this is definitely from a product performance perspective. It does put a little bit of pressure and unique challenges, I would say, on our chemistries. So next slide here, Jim. When I think about the pre-perspective, we were, I would argue, fit in some geographies to plant very early on. I mean, I heard stuff about some people planting mid-April, early April. And in terms of, if we are able to get into the ground, how long does that seed sit? That's more of an agronomy perspective. But if we're good weed scientists, I want you guys to think about this. Putting out our pre's mid-April, water hemp starts to germinate early May. From a germination perspective, we have a lot of time left on the clock, especially for water hemp. So I would say the one thing I would comment on in terms of product performance, at least from a pre-perspective, is we definitely had less nightmare scenarios than what I was expecting. With the amount of rainfall that we had with some of our earlier plantings, I did expect some of these pre-chemistry programs to fall apart a little bit quicker than what they did. Now, maybe your mileage varied, but I would say in general, when we got the pre's on, they worked relatively well. My call out would be where we did receive those incredibly excessive rainfall events, that probably did have an impact on our product performance. And I'm going to guess your experiences are similar. The one comment I would make is that I've heard, at least from some of our southern counterparts, that Tri-Volt looked great this year. And just a quick skinny, knowing we don't have a ton of time, our Group 15 and Tri-Volt needs a little bit more rain than we do with Harness brand products. And so to see that full activation was great for them. Did have a couple of reports come in to me about some excessive rain splash from some PPO chemistries, primarily the Valor-based products, so Fierce or Valor all-flumioxazin products. That is unfortunately something we have to deal with each and every year. I'd love to talk about that more when we have more time. From a corn post perspective, what I've been told, at least from some of my sales staff, is kind of something similar to what I would say you guys are experiencing, in that we're continuing to see some of these HPPDs post slip. I think Clisto and Clisto Extra are probably the worst culprits, but I don't want to mince words here, in that I think Caprino and Lotus have their challenges as well. If you're having escape issues with any of these chemistries, or an Armazon or an Impact product, please talk to your Chem FSR or Jim or I. We would love to help, maybe think about what we can do next year in the future. I think some of that in the years past has always been environmentally induced, right? We're hot, we're dry, and we already have some tolerance, but when you have two other factors involved, it makes sense we're going to have some issues. This year we've had pretty decent conditions, especially for the posts, assuming we can get them out into the field. So with that in mind, I think we're relying more and more on dicamba in corn. And I have a couple of slides here. I know it's been done to death, but I will really want to highlight this, and then we'll get into the soybean comments. So my recommendation, if you are advising on some fields that are doing some resprays, late resprays, our product of choice is Diflex. And so we can go up to V10 with that product. It's a safe and dicamba product. Status is going to cut off a little bit earlier. Jim, I can't remember. I think it's around V8, but I could be wrong. with both of these products, guys, we're really trying to clean up the messes. What I want to be cognizant of is as we get bigger corn, especially when we look at Dyflex, which can be applied up to V10, getting that into the world could really cause some problems. So whenever possible, definitely stay on that label recommendation of before V10. And then on top of that, I would also say if we have the opportunity, and I'm going to say a dirty word here, drops, that would be a comment as well. Next slide here, Jim. The reason I want to highlight Dyflex, and I'll even give some lip service to status, is that when it comes from a safety perspective, I'm definitely want to go out with a safe end product. And I actually got my slides out of order here, gentlemen. I'll talk about the safety in just a second. My call out for Dyflex, since I started with Bayer about 4 field seasons ago, we started off with 6 to 8 fluid ounces of Dyflex, then 8 to 10, now 10 to 12. And in some respray scenarios, I'm having FSRs go up to 14 to 16. We need the active out there to kill the weeds. We got to be cognizant of those late stage applications, but think about from a product performance perspective, put on our time machine hats. We go back a couple years, we're spraying dicamba, Extendamax, Ingenia, something like that, in our Asgrow Extend and Extend Flex beans. And what are our expectations if you have to go out and respray and you only came in with 11 fluid ounces? So that would be the equivalent of an 8-ounce rated Dyflex. My recommendation, if you are in these respray scenarios, let's do 10 to 12. I prefer 12, but we got to be cognizant of that leaf stage. So next slide here, Jim. I got my slides out of order in my head, and I apologize here, guys. I want to talk about the importance of a safener, right? So with dicamba, just like any of our other chemistries, our plants have to metabolize that chemistry. That can put some stress on our crop, especially when we start to get in these late vegetative stages. I do want to be mindful, especially of wind events. With our safe-end products, whether it's Dyflex or Status, we are going to sometimes see a crop response, especially if we're actively growing. And I think, Jim, you sent out a newsletter just a week ago with that explicitly, where we had non-sprayed fields still showing some of those, I would say, droopy corn or drunk corn symptomologies just from excessive growth. Knowing that, as a weed scientist, my primary concern is let's kill those weeds. But as a person with an agronomy degree who works really strongly and closely with agronomists like Jim, I also recommend and understand that the agronomy cannot take the back seat, right? We don't want our corn to have we do not want our corn to have a bad day. So if we can avoid that by using a safe end product, even if it is a little bit more expensive, excuse me, guys, that's definitely going to be something that I invest in every time. Next slide here, Jim. From a soil perspective, go ahead,
Adam. I was just going to comment, and I know Denny and I had hit on this a couple weeks ago. That the V10 to 36 inch we think is pushing it. So yeah, ideally cutting it off by V8, and some of this later planted corn we're approaching that timeline. But I sure have seen some fields that were sprayed with Dyflex that did lay over. They came back just fine. So sometimes you have to go through a little bit of nervous time. But then I know of some fields and saw some personally that were sprayed with unsafe and dicamba and had some very high rates of green snap and had to be replanted even in some cases. So it's real, and it's continues to show up every year.
And that's a really good point. And if I'm going to listen to anyone, Jim, it's going to be you and Denny. Your years of experience definitely have a lot of value, especially when making these type of decisions. There is such a thing as too late, especially when it comes to dicamba. With that in mind, my slides on that last slide did show some data about green snap and yield. We do have increased green snap with unsafe end products, and there is a yield impact, unsurprisingly, with that. So with that, I know I want to give Jim enough time to talk through the rest of his topics. Let's hit on soy posts, right? So we're still probably going through this process right now. So next slide here, 2,4-D versus dicamba. This isn't the conversation maybe you're bracing yourself for. My main comment being, for those of you that are using the E3 system, regardless of brand, I want to call out there are some differences from a weed science perspective of 2,4-D versus dicamba. I have a bar graph here, and I'm hoping it's still in the slide deck, Jim. But my main call out is we got a lot more gaps, I would say, when we are relying on 2,4-D than if we're using dicamba. From an AI perspective, a full rate of Enlist 1 is 0.95 pounds acid equivalent. In comparison, dicamba, we're doing a 1/2 pound of acid equivalent. Now, there are differences between those chemistries, but my main call out, not only is the dose higher, we also have, I would say, limited performance on the number of weed species that we can control. So with that, I'm really relying on some of those tank mix partners to really fill in some of the gaps that we're going to get with 2,4-D. And this isn't me shitting on the E3 system. I want to be fully transparent about that. I just want us to set ourselves up for success. So when it comes for, I would say, the 2,4-D aspect, I'm definitely relying on Liberty, and I'm definitely relying on Roundup whenever possible to kind of fill in some of those voids. Now, with that in mind, Liberty, I think we're spraying more and more of this each and every year, and depending on your comfortableness and your previous experience with this, I would say the reason Liberty has struggled to gain the foothold from a historical perspective as a Roundup did is just that it is a finicky molecule. You know, you need hot, sunny days, and it's a contact chemistry. So with that in mind, my best management practices, and this isn't a surprise, but Liberty absolutely needs a nitrogen source. This is one of those instances where if you're trying to choose between, an AMS replacement product versus straight good spray grade AMS, I'm sticking with the AMS. And I think, and I could be wrong here, but I'm fairly certain you can also use UAN. I would stick to the AMS because I really need the ammonium version of nitrogen to improve uptake and to improve efficacy, I would say. From a surfactant perspective, name brand Liberty is going to have more surfactant kind of in the jug in comparison to some of the generic products you might be working with. Some of that's to, I would say, improve product performance under a variety of conditions, just like what we do with our Roundup Power Max 3 formulation with a surfactant. Inner line would be I would say, not necessarily off-brand, but maybe second-tier brand of a glufosinate product. It's pretty good. It does have, I would say, a little less surfactant than name brand Liberty. So depending on what you're working with, keep that in mind. I want to be cognizant, though, from a coverage perspective, knowing that all of our weeds are definitely 4 inches tall. Coverage is your friend, right? We're going to be able to cover less acres, but anytime we can bump up from 15 to 20 or 25, you're gonna, I think, be glad that you did. Outside of that, if you're including an overlapping residual, I want to take into consideration that formulation. And Jim, this is my last slide here, because if you do this wrong, we can have impacts. And if we've struggled through the season, struggled through the constraints that we've had, and our beans are looking pretty good, but we got some weeds, the last thing we want to do is injure them to the point where we have yield impacts. And so with that in mind, when I'm looking at trying to do tank mixes with a Liberty product, with a Roundup product, with Enlist One maybe in the tank as well, and knowing we still got to cover all the way through maybe early August for water hemp emergence, that overlapping residual chemistry matters. And the adjuvant package that we choose to put in with this also matters. And so with that, when I'm looking at an overlapping residual product, a dual product, that's an oil-based, Outlook's going to be oil-based. I think Zidua SC would be okay, or if you were using straight goods, the dry granular formulation of Zidua would be probably fine. But my product of choice, and this isn't just because I got a bear logo on my chest, is Warrant from an encapsulation and water it's a water soluble encapsulation. So from a crop safety perspective, I'm not worried about it adding additional oil into the tank. Now, if you're choosing to add in one of these oil formulations and then forego adding maybe an MSO or a high surfactant oil concentrate or maybe some crop oil, you're probably going to be fine. Just, I caution putting in an oil-based Group 15 with an MSO, with Liberty, with Roundup, knowing we have a lot of surfactant in there and a lot of oil. So that's my main call out, Jim. That doesn't come up very often, but just in case someone's working with a product they haven't used in the past, I thought this might be handy.
Oh, great call outs, Adam. And I think the last slide here just showing some examples of that, some of your recommendations there.
Yep, that was highlighting what I was just talking about. Sorry about that.
All right, very good. Well, any questions for Adam, comments, or any last points here? Because there's a lot of beans to spray, and some of them we're not going to be able to get in for several days yet. So we know we're going to be pushing the label limits on weed size as well as crop stage.
Without a question, Jim, I'm on the road again, but my comment would be R3, too late to spray Liberty. R2, probably a little too late to spray Liberty. I would stick to that R1 cutoff whenever possible.
Mm-hmm. Yep, technically that's where the label goes, and we know some Liberty does get sprayed at R2, but yeah, once you start getting into pod formation, I agree it'd be time to cut it off.
And I should probably clarify that. And Jim, you can tell me if I'm speaking out of turn or maybe being obtuse. Comment about that. You know, a lot of times these labels don't say why. So the question I get the most from my sales staff is why. In that case, it's not just about the foliar burn. It's that we can actually burn off some of the still forming flowers or newly developed pods, which has a direct yield impact, as I'm sure you guys would probably recognize. So whenever possible, let's not do those late applications. The revenge, I would say, against the weeds is not worth it.
Yeah, we talked about the emotions before. Sometimes that's the emotional call that you have to be careful about. Well, thanks, Adam. Appreciate you being on. I know you're on the road, so it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but yeah, a lot of great comments, and glad to have you on the team. Just going to finish up here, and this really goes to some of my earlier comments about managing this crop. You know, we've got a lot of other things going on, but we also are in a disease environment. Just a little update on tar spot. This was as of 2 weeks ago where we were at, and then as of yesterday, the expansion. And you can see a number of counties throughout central Iowa, west central Iowa. You know, some of the areas as you look in Illinois, you don't see the actual identification, but most of those areas they've had tar spot, so they're not really sending in samples so much. So it's a little misleading when you look at a map like that. With tar spot, you know, we've mentioned this before. We do have the Tar Spotter app. As I've been looking at that app over the last 2 weeks, the risk level actually has gone down. Really, last week, 10 days ago, it was 95, 96%, or for sure above 90. When I checked yesterday, it was at 70%, still in the high category. And then just the other comment, just as a reminder of some of the products in our lineup that are a little bit more susceptible. Those are the ones to keep in mind. You know, we want to make sure that we've got scouting on these products, and if we weren't planning on spraying and we do have tar spot in the area, more particularly 5218, 10733 as far as some volume products, 6269, 6270, those ones I would certainly be paying attention to. And then really wrap up here, just overall response to fungicide. Hopefully you've all gotten the information that Paige and I have put together on some of the products that we see higher chance at response to fungicide, but certainly the ones on this list are ones you also want to pay attention to. It's getting to be products on the low side of response to fungicide, or older products more in that workhorse category. But we know fungicides are going to be able to help us out, obviously, on disease management, but also the plant health and standability. So keep that in mind. I know with fields that are uneven, tasseling uneven, obviously have drowned out spots, that's going to be a tough call for fungicides, but we also want to manage the acres that we have. The acres that are left, we want to make sure we can get everything out of them as possible, especially when you look at the fact that most likely we're going to be into a later harvest this season with some of the later planting windows. So, some of that crop's going to need to stand out there for quite a while. Last thing is our spotlight product of the week, and this is Alloy 18E35, another Enlist variety that's got the peaking source of soybean cyst nematode resistance. So it gives us a nice opportunity to bring that into the lineup. This product's very well balanced as far as disease and IDC characteristics. So not too many weaknesses for this one overall. So it's just another variety that we can bring into the E3 side for an offering next year. So with that, it's a slide a lot of you have been waiting for. We've got our QR code here for the half credit in crop management. So take advantage of that for the CCAs. Also have the QR code for those that are not signed up to receive some of the company generated agronomic information newsletters that come out. Usually those are weekly. So if you're not signed up for those, go ahead and click on that QR code. Otherwise, we are wrapped up. And Nick Weber, as usual, does a good job of posting in the chat. So he's got some of the information about tar spot, more information from the Bear side. And, one thing with tar spot is, with the moisture, the humidity we have, the risk level looks high. The key thing is, what does it look like here right after pollination or right during pollination? Typically, as we move into that reproductive stage, the crop becomes a little bit more susceptible to all diseases as it shifts from vegetative to reproductive. So, that's a key time to really watch what our environmental conditions are and seeing if we do have presence of tar spot. This time of the year, if you're scouting, I would kind of focus in on the middle part of the canopy in those areas where you've got leaves that tend to be a little flatter, just from the standpoint of longer leaf wetness. With foliar diseases, particularly tar spot, when you've got continuous leaf wetness, that's the first place you're going to see that disease develop. And so, it's hard to look at all the plants, the whole canopy, but if you are focusing on those leaves that are tending to be flat in the middle part of the canopy, most likely that's where you're going to see it first. All right, I think we are ready to wrap up. So again, appreciate everyone for being on the call this morning. Take care and keep moving forward. Thank you.